What is the scariest thing you've ever seen in your life that you can't explain? Story 1. This completely changed how I see the world. I was in my backyard around midnight, just looking up at the stars because I couldn't sleep. I noticed this weird star that seemed to be moving in this bouncing pattern, like it was suspended on invisible strings. I grabbed my phone to record it, and that's when things got absolutely terrifying. This massive beam of white light suddenly appeared in my neighbor's yard, maybe 40 feet from where I was standing. It wasn't coming from anywhere I could see, just this perfect cylinder of light from the darkness above, about 8 feet across. The beam started moving around frantically like it was searching for something, and I got this overwhelming feeling that it was looking for me specifically. My whole body just went cold. The light moved closer to my side of the fence, then started scanning up the side of my neighbor's house toward their window. That's when I totally lost it. I slammed my window shut, pulled the blackout curtains, and ran to the bathroom in the center of the house. I stayed there for like an hour, too scared to even peek outside. The whole thing lasted maybe 8 or 9 seconds, but it felt like an eternity. I haven't looked up at the night sky the same way since. It's been 3 years and I still get chills thinking about it. Whatever that was, it knew exactly where I was and didn't want me filming it. The message was crystal clear: stop watching or face the consequences. I've only told my wife and parents about this. Part of me wonders if I was losing my mind, but I know what I experienced was real. Story 2. Okay, so this is gonna sound totally crazy, but I swear on my life this happened. Back in 2019, I was house sitting for my aunt in rural Louisiana while she was visiting family up north. Old farmhouse, been in our family forever, sits on about 15 acres of mostly woods. First few nights were fine, nothing weird. Then around the 4th night, I start hearing these sounds outside. Not like normal animal sounds, more like someone walking around the house, but the footsteps were too heavy and spaced too far apart. Like something with really long legs taking slow, deliberate steps. I look out the window and don't see anything, but the motion sensor lights keep turning on in sequence, like something is walking past each one. The thing is, when I look outside, there's nothing there, but I can see the grass moving like something invisible is walking through it. This goes on for 3 nights in a row. Same pattern, starts around 11 p.m., circles the house for about an hour, then stops. I start staying up to watch for it, and that's when things got really weird. On the 7th night, I'm sitting in the living room with all the lights off, watching through the front window. The motion lights start turning on again, but this time I see it. This huge shadow moving between the trees, but it's wrong. It's like it's walking upright, but the shadow is too tall and too thin to be human. Then it does something that made my blood run cold. It stops right in front of the window where I'm sitting and waves. Not like a friendly wave, more like it was mocking me, like it knew I'd been watching and was letting me know it saw me too. I called my aunt immediately, told her I had a family emergency and had to leave. She was understanding, but I could tell she wasn't surprised. Found out later she'd been having the same experiences for years, just never mentioned it because family would think I'm losing it. She ended up selling the place 6 months later. New owners lasted 3 weeks before they moved out. The house is still empty as far as I know. Some things are better left alone. Story 3. This is probably the most terrifying thing that's ever happened to me, and I still can't wrap my head around it 5 years later. I was working as a janitor at this gas station to pay for college. It was usually pretty quiet after midnight, just the occasional truck driver or someone getting off a late shift. One night around 2 a.m., I had what I can only describe as the most intense vision I've ever experienced. I wasn't asleep, I was wide awake, organizing inventory behind the counter. Suddenly I saw this scene play out in my mind like I was watching a movie. A woman in a red coat was going to come into the store in exactly 7 minutes. She was going to buy a pack of cigarettes and a coffee, and while she was paying, 2 guys were going to come in and try to rob the place. One of them had a knife. In my vision, I saw myself getting hurt because I froze up and didn't react quickly enough. I know this sounds insane, but the vision felt more real than anything I'd ever experienced. I could smell the woman's perfume, hear the specific way the door chime sounded when the guys came in, everything. So I did something I'd never done before. I called the police and told them I had a feeling something bad was about to happen at the store. 7 minutes later, a woman in a red coat walked in. My hands were shaking as she ordered cigarettes and coffee, exactly like in my vision. While she was digging in her purse for money, I saw 2 guys approaching the door. I hit the panic button under the counter just as they walked in. The cops arrived within minutes and caught both guys. One of them did have a knife, just like I'd seen. The officers were amazed at the timing, and honestly, so was I. The woman in the red coat kept asking how I knew to call for help. I still don't understand what happened that night or why I was able to see it coming. It's been 8 years and I've never experienced anything like it again, but it completely changed how I think about reality. Story 4. This is the weirdest thing that's ever happened to me and I still can't wrap my head around it. Back in college, me and my roommate decided to take a road trip to visit his family about 4 hours away. Pretty straightforward drive on familiar highways. We left his dorm around 2 p.m. on a Saturday. I remember checking the time because we wanted to get there before dinner. I was driving and we stopped for gas maybe an hour in, grabbed some snacks, normal road trip stuff. The GPS said we'd arrive around 6:15. Here's where it gets strange. I remember driving through this small town, maybe 2 hours into the trip. Nothing special about it, just your typical main street with a few shops and a traffic light. We were talking about something, probably complaining about our professors, when suddenly my roommate goes completely quiet. I look over and he's just staring ahead with this confused look on his face. Then he checks his phone and goes, "Dude, what time is it?" I glance at the dashboard clock and it says 8:30 p.m. We both just sat there in silence trying to figure out what happened. According to the GPS, we were still about 45 minutes away from his family's house, which made no sense. We should have been there over 2 hours ago. Neither of us remembered stopping anywhere after that small town, and we definitely didn't take any detours or get lost. The route was basically a straight shot on the interstate. When we finally got there around 9:15, his parents were worried sick because we were supposed to call when we arrived. We tried to explain what happened, but honestly, we had no explanation. We had somehow lost almost 3 hours and neither of us could account for it. The drive back was completely normal, 4 hours exactly like it should have been. We talked about it for months afterward, trying to figure out if we had pulled over somewhere and fell asleep, or taken a wrong turn, or anything that would make sense. But we both remembered the trip clearly up until that moment of lost time. Still gives me chills thinking about it. Where did those 3 hours go? Story 5. This was about 6 years ago. My family went camping up in the Ozarks. Me, my wife, and our 2 kids, they were maybe 8 and 11 at the time. We'd done this trip before, same campground, never had any issues. Second night we're there, I wake up around 3 a.m. because I hear my youngest whispering in the tent next to ours. I can't make out what she's saying, but she sounds scared. I unzip our tent quietly to check on them, and that's when I see it. There's something standing at the edge of our campsite, maybe 20 feet away. It's tall, like basketball player tall, but wrong somehow. The proportions are all messed up. Long arms, too long neck, and it's just standing there perfectly still, facing our kids' tent. I'm trying to process what I'm looking at when it turns its head toward me. Not its body, just its head, and it rotates way further than it should be able to. Even in the darkness I can see its eyes reflecting the light from our camp lantern. I don't know how long we stared at each other, but suddenly my wife grabs my arm and whispers, "What is that thing?" The moment she speaks, the thing just dissolves. Like it was never there. We packed up and left that morning. Didn't even stay for breakfast. The kids kept asking why we were leaving early, but how do you explain something like that? They said they thought they heard someone calling their names during the night, but couldn't tell where it was coming from. Found out later from the camp host that there'd been a few other families who left early that same week. All complained about weird noises and feeling watched. Management said it was probably just wildlife, but man, I've been around wildlife my whole life. That wasn't any animal I've ever seen. Story 6. This happened to me and my buddy Jake when we were driving back from fishing in Arkansas, probably around 2017. We'd stayed way too late at the lake and were driving home around midnight on these backcountry roads. We're maybe 30 minutes from town when Jake suddenly slams on the brakes. I'm like, "Dude, what the heck?" And he just points ahead. Standing in the middle of the road, maybe 50 feet in front of us, is this thing that looked like a person, but completely wrong. It was tall, had to be at least 7 feet, but it was too skinny. Like someone had stretched a normal person out. It had these long, thin arms that hung down past its knees, and it was just standing there in our headlights, not moving. Jake starts backing up slowly, and this thing tilts its head to the side, watching us. Then it starts walking toward our truck, but it's not walking normal. It's taking these huge steps, like it's trying to cover ground fast but also trying to look casual about it. We're both freaking out at this point. Jake throws the truck in reverse and floors it, and when I look back through the rear window, this thing is following us. Not running, just taking those same long, weird steps, but somehow keeping up with us even though we're going like 40 miles per hour in reverse. Jake finds a side road and whips the truck around, and we get out of there fast. When we look back, the thing is just standing in the road again, watching us drive away. We reported it to the sheriff, thinking maybe someone was playing a prank or something, but the deputy just gave us this look like he'd heard this before. Said there'd been a few similar reports over the years, always on that same stretch of road. Neither of us drive that route anymore. Jake swears he's seen it again a couple times when he's had to go that way for work, always in the same spot, always just standing there waiting. Story 7. I used to work security for this old office building downtown that was built in the 1922nd Mostly just walked around checking doors and making sure everything was locked up after business hours. The building had a reputation for being haunted, but I figured that was just typical old building nonsense. Most nights were pretty quiet, but there was this one area on the third floor that always gave me the creeps. It used to be the executive offices back in the day, and there was this long hallway with rooms on both sides. Even with all the lights on, it felt heavy and oppressive, like the air was thicker than it should be. One night around midnight, I'm doing my rounds when I hear what sounds like typing coming from one of the offices down that hallway. These old manual typewriters, you know? The kind that make that distinctive clacking sound. I figured maybe someone was working late and I hadn't seen them leave, so I went to check it out. The typing got louder as I walked down the hall, but when I got to the office where the sound was coming from, it was completely empty. Dark, locked up, no one inside. But I could still hear the typing, clear as day, like someone was sitting at a desk right in front of me. Then it stopped. Just complete silence. I'm standing there with my flashlight, totally confused, when I hear a chair creak like someone was getting up. Then footsteps, slow and deliberate, walking toward me from inside the empty office. I'm not embarrassed to say I completely lost it and ran. Didn't stop until I was back downstairs in the lobby. I called my supervisor and told him I was taking a break, stayed down there until my shift ended. The next day I asked the building manager about the history of that floor. Turns out a secretary had a heart attack and passed away at her desk in that exact office back in 1987. She was known for staying late and working on important documents. I requested to be transferred to a different building after that. Some jobs just aren't worth it. Story 8. I was house sitting for my aunt last summer and sleeping in her guest room. Around 2 a.m. I woke up because I felt like someone was staring at me. You know that feeling? I opened my eyes and there was this tall, dark figure standing right at the foot of the bed. I couldn't move for what felt like forever, just staring at this thing. It had no real features, just this human-shaped shadow, but I could tell it was looking directly at me. The strangest part was that it felt familiar somehow, like I'd seen it before but couldn't place where. I blinked hard thinking I was dreaming, but when I opened my eyes it was still there. Then I heard my aunt's cat hissing from somewhere in the house, and the figure just melted away into nothing, like it dissolved into the darkness. Found out later that my aunt's previous tenant had passed away in that room from a heart attack. She never told me because she didn't want to freak me out. Well, thanks for that I guess. Story 9. This is probably going to sound totally crazy, but I swear it's true. When I was around 7 years old, I started having this recurring nightmare. In the dream, I was always in this specific house. It had dark green carpet, wood paneling on the walls, and this really steep staircase going up to the second floor. There was always this feeling of dread, like something bad was going to happen there. The dream was so vivid and happened so often that I could draw you a floor plan of that house. My parents thought it was just my overactive imagination, especially since we'd never been in a house that looked anything like that. Fast forward to when I'm 12. My dad gets a job transfer and we have to move across the state. We're looking at rental houses, and when we pull up to this one particular place, my stomach just drops. It's the exact house from my dreams, down to every single detail. We walk inside and I'm just freaking out internally. The green carpet, the wood paneling, even the way the light came through the windows was exactly how I dreamed it. My parents loved the place and decided to rent it, even though I begged them not to. Living there was like being stuck in a constant state of anxiety. Every night I'd lie in bed waiting for whatever terrible thing was supposed to happen. We lived there for 2 years and while nothing truly awful occurred, there were always these weird little things, doors that wouldn't stay closed, cold spots that moved around the house, electronics that would turn on and off by themselves. The day we finally moved out was honestly one of the best days of my life. I never had that dream again after we left. Still can't explain how I knew about that house years before I ever saw it. Story 10. I need to get this off my chest because it still messes with me years later. This happened when I was in college, probably around 2018. Me and 3 of my roommates decided to check out this supposedly haunted cemetery about an hour outside town. Yeah, I know, typical college nonsense, but we were bored and someone had told us about weird stuff happening there. We got there around midnight and it was one of those super foggy nights where you can barely see 20 feet in front of you. The cemetery was old, like 1,800 second old, with those weathered headstones and iron gates that looked straight out of a horror movie. We brought flashlights and started walking around, mostly just goofing off and trying to scare each other. About 30 minutes in, we're walking down this narrow path between some larger monuments when my roommate Jake suddenly stops and goes, "Do you guys see that?" We all look where he's pointing and there's this figure standing maybe 50 yards away near this big mausoleum. At first I thought it might be just another person, maybe another group of college kids doing the same stupid thing we were doing. But then we realized how tall this thing was. Like unnaturally tall, probably close to 7 feet, and it was just standing completely still. None of us could make out any details because of the fog, but there was something about its shape that was just wrong. Too thin, too angular, not quite human looking. We all stood there staring for what felt like forever, nobody wanting to be the first to say what we were all thinking. Then my roommate Sarah whispers, "Guys, I don't think that's a person." As soon as she said it, the figure started moving toward us. Not walking normally, but kind of gliding in this jerky, unnatural way. That's when we all totally lost it and ran back to the car as fast as we could. We didn't stop running until we were off the cemetery grounds completely. When we finally caught our breath and looked back, there was nothing there. The whole drive home we kept trying to rationalize what we'd seen, but nobody could come up with a good explanation. We never went back to that cemetery. Sometimes when we all get together now, someone will bring it up and we'll talk about it for a few minutes, but then the conversation always dies out. None of us really want to think too hard about what we actually saw that night. Story 11. This happened when I was driving home late one night, maybe around midnight, when I decided to take off my jacket, tossed it onto the passenger seat like I always do. But this time, the jacket landed weird, like it was sitting on top of something invisible. I could see it was propped up in this perfect dome shape. Curious, I reached over and pressed down on it while driving. The second my hand touched whatever was under there, everything electronic in my truck went completely nuts. The radio started blasting static at full volume, my Bluetooth disconnected, and every single light on the dashboard started flashing like a strobe light. The whole thing lasted maybe 3 seconds, but it scared the crap out of me so badly I almost veered off the road. When everything stopped, the radio was still stuck on static and I had to manually turn it off. The jacket was just lying flat on the seat like normal. I pulled over and checked under it, nothing there at all. I've had that truck for years and nothing like that ever happened before or since. I know it sounds ridiculous, but I swear there was something there. Story 12. I work night shifts at an old hospital that's been around since the 1942nd. Anyone who's worked healthcare knows these old places can get pretty creepy, but what happened to me last month was something else entirely. I was doing my rounds around 3 a.m. when I heard this woman crying. Not unusual, people are in pain, families are stressed. But when I went to check on the rooms, everyone was either asleep or the rooms were empty. The crying kept getting louder, more desperate sounding. I followed the sound down to the end of the hall where we have a couple rooms that aren't in use right now. The crying was definitely coming from room 308. I unlocked the door and flipped on the light, ready to find someone who had wandered in somehow. The room was completely empty. No bed, no furniture, nothing. But I could still hear the crying, clear as day, like someone was standing right next to me. The hair on my arm stood up and I got this overwhelming feeling that I needed to get out of there immediately. I backed out and locked the door behind me. Went straight to the nurse's station and asked if anyone else heard anything. My coworker just gave me this look and said, "Room 308 again?" Turns out this happens regularly, always a woman crying, always that same room. Found out later that room used to be part of the maternity ward back in the day. Makes you wonder what kind of sadness got left behind in those walls. Story 13. This is going to sound totally insane, but I still can't explain what happened. Me and 2 friends decided to explore this abandoned factory on the outskirts of town. It had been shut down for probably 15 years, all the windows were boarded up, and there were no trespassing signs everywhere. Obviously that just made us want to check it out more. We found a way in through a broken window in the back and started walking around with flashlights. The place was massive, 3 floors of empty machinery and rusted equipment. Everything was covered in dust and graffiti, exactly what you'd expect from an abandoned building. We were on the 2nd floor when we heard music coming from somewhere above us. Not like a radio or anything, but actual live music. It sounded like a piano and maybe someone singing, really faint but definitely there. We all heard it and just looked at each other like what the heck. So naturally we had to investigate. We climbed up to the 3rd floor and the music got louder as we got closer to this one particular room. The door was closed but we could see light coming from underneath it. Actual warm, yellow light like from old bulbs. My friend Jake reached for the door handle and the music just stopped. Dead silence. He opened the door and the room was completely empty. No piano, no lights, nothing. Just dusty floor and broken windows with moonlight coming through. But here's the really messed up part. The dust on the floor was disturbed in the shape of a perfect rectangle, exactly where a piano would have been sitting. And there were footprints around it, small ones like from a woman's shoes. Fresh footprints in dust that looked like it hadn't been touched in years. We got out of there pretty quick after that. Drove by the place a few weeks later and it was being demolished. Part of me wonders if we were the last people to hear whatever was going on in that room. Story 14. So this happened about 6 months ago and I still get chills thinking about it. My dad had this old television in his bedroom that he'd had for like 15 years. Thing was ancient, one of those thick ones with the built-in DVD player that barely worked anymore. He passed away from a heart attack on a Tuesday, and we spent the next few days going through his stuff and making arrangements. The whole family was staying at his house that weekend to sort everything out. Friday night, my mom, my brother, and I were sitting in the living room just talking about memories and trying to keep each other company. All of a sudden, we hear this loud sound coming from upstairs. It was that old television turning on way. You know how those older ones make that weird electronic whirring noise when they power up? But here's the thing that totally freaked us out. The television had been unplugged since Wednesday. I specifically remember my brother unplugging it when we were cleaning out Dad's room. We all just looked at each other like, what the heck was that? My brother went upstairs to check, and sure enough, the television was on and showing static. The power cord was still unplugged, just lying there on the floor next to the outlet. There was no way that thing could have turned on. My mom started crying and said she thought it was Dad letting us know he was still around somehow. I'm usually pretty skeptical about this kind of stuff, but I honestly can't explain what happened. The television never did anything like that before, and it hasn't done it since. Sometimes I wonder if he was just trying to tell us everything was going to be okay. Story 15. I have to share this because it still messes with my head and my sister can back me up on every detail. Our grandma raised us after our parents got into some serious trouble when we were kids, and she was basically like our mom. She had this thing where every Sunday she'd make these amazing pancakes with fresh berries, and we'd sit at her kitchen table and she'd tell us stories about when she was young. She got really sick when I was in college, and we knew she didn't have much time left. The night she passed away, I was in my dorm room about 3 hours away, and my sister was at her apartment across town. Neither of us were there with Grandma when it happened, which still makes me feel terrible. That same night, I had the most vivid dream of my life. I was back in Grandma's kitchen, and she was making pancakes just like always. She looked exactly like she did when she was healthy, not sick and frail like she'd been the past few months. She turned to me and said, "Don't worry about me, sweetheart. I'm fine now and I'm not hurting anymore. Take care of your sister." Then she hugged me so tight I could actually feel it, and I woke up. I was pretty shaken up by how real it felt, but I figured it was just my brain processing everything. About an hour later, my phone rings and it's my sister, completely panicked. She goes, "I need to tell you about this crazy dream I just had." Before I could even respond, she starts describing the exact same dream, Grandma's kitchen, the pancakes, even the same words about not worrying and taking care of each other. We compared every detail, and it was identical. Same conversation, same hug, same feeling of peace at the end. My sister had never been in that kitchen during Pancake Sunday because she moved out before that tradition started, so there's no way she could have dreamed those specific details. The weird part is we both felt this incredible sense of comfort afterward, like Grandma really had come to say goodbye. I don't usually believe in that kind of stuff, but how do you explain two people having the exact same detailed dream on the same night? Still gives me goosebumps when I think about it. Story 16. I'm probably going to sound completely nuts telling this story, but my whole family witnessed it, so I know I'm not losing my mind. My great aunt passed away last spring, and she had this massive collection of antique dolls that honestly creeped everyone out. Most of them were like 100 years old with those glass eyes that seemed to follow you around the room. After the funeral, my mom inherited a bunch of aunt's stuff, including this one particular doll that was apparently super valuable. It was about 2 feet tall, had this elaborate Victorian dress, and the most unsettling smile you've ever seen. My mom decided to keep it in our guest room until she could figure out what to do with it. The thing started moving around the house on its own. I know how that sounds, but I'm being completely serious. First, we'd find it in different rooms from where we left it. Then it started showing up in really weird places, sitting in chairs at the kitchen table, standing in the hallway facing the front door, stuff like that. My dad thought one of us kids was messing around, but we all swore we weren't touching the thing. It got worse over the next few weeks. The doll would be in one room when we went to bed, and by morning it would be somewhere totally different. My mom even tried locking it in a closet one night, and we found it sitting on the couch the next morning. The closet door was still locked. The final straw was when my little sister woke up screaming one night because the doll was sitting on her nightstand, staring at her bed. That's when my parents had enough. My dad grabbed the doll, drove it to the local church, and donated it to their next yard sale. He didn't even stick around to see if they'd accept it, just left it on their doorstep with a note explaining it was a donation. We never found out what happened to it after that, but I sometimes wonder if whoever bought it is dealing with the same weird stuff we were. Part of me feels bad for not warning them, but honestly, I was just glad it was out of our house. The whole experience made me never want to own anything antique ever again. Some people think we were just psyching ourselves out, but there's no way all 4 of us imagined the same thing happening night after night. That doll definitely had something wrong with it, and I'm convinced it wasn't just our imagination. Story 17. This happened about 6 months after my uncle died, and I still can't make sense of it. He was my dad's younger brother and basically like a second father to me growing up. Always took me fishing, taught me how to drive stick shift, that kind of stuff. Really good guy who passed way too young from complications during what should have been routine surgery. I was having a rough time dealing with his death because we were really close, and I felt guilty that I hadn't visited him in the hospital before he passed. One Saturday morning, I was sleeping in late when my phone rang. Half asleep, I picked it up without looking at the caller ID. "Hey kiddo, how you been?" It was my uncle's voice. Exactly the same as always, that slight rasp from years of smoking, the way he always called me kiddo even though I'm in my 20s now. I was so disoriented from just waking up that for a second I forgot he was gone and started having a normal conversation with him. "Oh hey Uncle Mike, I'm doing alright. How are you feeling?" Then it hit me like a brick wall. He died 6 months ago. I sat straight up in bed, fully awake now, but the line had gone dead. I immediately called my dad, totally shaken up, and told him what happened. He got quiet for a minute and then said something that made my blood run cold. He told me that Uncle Mike used to call people kiddo all the time, but I was the only one he ever called that consistently. My dad had never heard him use that word with anyone else. I checked my phone records later and there was no incoming call logged for that time. No number, no duration, nothing. But I know what I heard, and I know I was talking to someone. The conversation felt completely real and lasted at least 30 seconds. My dad thinks Uncle Mike was just checking in on me because he knew I was struggling with his death. I don't know what to believe, but it definitely gave me some peace knowing that wherever he is, he's still looking out for me. Story 18. When my daughter was 4, she started talking about the tiny man who lived in her closet. At first we thought it was just typical kid imagination stuff, you know how they are with imaginary friends. But then she started describing very specific things about him, how he was about as tall as her teddy bear, wore raggedy clothes, and liked to rearrange her toys at night. My wife and I would find her toys moved around in the morning, but we figured she was just playing and forgot. Kids do that all the time. Then one night I heard her talking to someone in her room around midnight. I went to check on her and found her sitting up in bed having a full conversation with her closet. "He says he's sorry for waking you up, Daddy," she told me. I asked her what she meant and she pointed to her closet. "He accidentally knocked over my dollhouse trying to fix it for me." I looked over and her wooden dollhouse, which had been missing a few pieces for weeks, was now completely assembled with all the tiny furniture arranged perfectly. I hadn't fixed it, my wife hadn't fixed it, and there's no way our 4-year-old could have done that kind of detailed work. The next week, my wife was putting our daughter to bed when she screamed and pointed at the closet. We both saw something small dart behind the hanging clothes. When we moved everything aside, we found a little pile of nuts and berries that definitely hadn't been there before. It was like something had been leaving offerings. We ended up moving her to a different bedroom, and the visits stopped. She's 8 now and still sometimes asks if we ever found out who her tiny friend was. Honestly, I'm not sure I want to know. Part of me thinks maybe some things are better left as mysteries, especially when they seem harmless. But I still get goosebumps thinking about watching that little shadow disappear into the clothes. Story 19. After my mom passed away last year, some really strange stuff started happening in her house. I was staying there for a few weeks while we sorted through her things and got everything ready to sell. Mom had this old radio in the kitchen that she used to listen to every morning while having her coffee. The radio had been unplugged since she went to the hospital, but one morning I wake up and hear music coming from downstairs. I go to check it out and the radio is playing her favorite song, this old jazz tune she always hummed around the house. The weird part is that the radio was still unplugged, and when I checked, there were no batteries in it either. I turned it off and unplugged it from the wall completely, thinking maybe there was some weird electrical thing going on. But the next morning, same thing happened. Same song playing, radio still unplugged. This went on for about a week before it finally stopped. My sister thinks I was just stressed and imagining things, but I know what I heard. The song was crystal clear, playing at the exact volume Mom always had it at. Part of me thinks maybe she was trying to let me know she was okay, or maybe she just wasn't ready to let go of her morning routine yet. I ended up keeping that radio instead of donating it with the rest of her stuff. Story 20. So this happened about 2 years ago and I still get chills thinking about it. My dad had this old television in his bedroom that he'd had for like 15 years. Thing was ancient, one of those thick ones with the built-in DVD player that barely worked anymore. He passed away from a heart attack on a Tuesday, and we spent the next few days going through his stuff and making arrangements. The whole family was staying at his house that weekend to sort everything out. Friday night, my mom, my brother, and I were sitting in the living room just talking about memories and trying to keep each other company. All of a sudden, we hear this loud sound coming from upstairs. It was that old television turning on. You know how those older ones make that weird electronic whirring noise when they power up? But here's the thing that totally freaked us out. The television had been unplugged since Wednesday. I specifically remember my brother unplugging it when we were cleaning out Dad's room. We all just looked at each other like, what the heck was that? My brother went upstairs to check, and sure enough, the television was on and showing static. The power cord was still unplugged, just lying there on the floor next to the outlet. There was no way that thing could have turned on. My mom started crying and said she thought it was Dad letting us know he was still around somehow. I'm usually pretty skeptical about this kind of stuff, but I honestly can't explain what happened. The television never did anything like that before, and it hasn't done it since. Sometimes I wonder if he was just trying to tell us everything was going to be okay.